happy to be here. Happy to thank you, Fondation Rafael del Pino, for your invitation, and thank you all for being here. So the purpose of this table will be to share the participant views, the attendees' views, on the institutional sides and support of deep tech, and question this issue. So first, maybe my first question would be for you, for the economist on my left. How would you define deep tech? Not going in too many details, but what would you, because when you have a good definition, then you can draft policies that are tailored.
Well, thank you, Faisal, for the question. My name is Fernando Galindo-Rueda. I work at the OECD, and thank you for the invitation to the foundation. And I'm glad to be here, joined by fellow panelists. My work at the OECD involves a number of things which I think connect with the invitation, but I want to highlight as well that I'm speaking on personal capacity, so what I say here now, it does in no way necessarily represent the views of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So one of the things that I'm personally directly involved with is work around the definitions in the OECD and some of our guidelines around R&D, innovation, and related concepts. So for a number of years, I've been quite heavily involved in this task of bringing together people from different countries, agreeing on definitions. First, the concepts that are to be measured, the definitions, but we do that with a number of specific purposes. And I think this is something I wanted to bring to this discussion. Why are we defining? I think Professor Fiona Murray alluded to one of these key issues, which is to differentiate. And in some sense, definitions are often to discriminate, but I mean that in the positive sense of the word, to treat different groups differently or different activities differently. There's lots of implications, especially around public support. It's an important element, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. But there are other issues that we define in order to be able to measure things. If we don't know what we're trying to measure, then how are we going to do it? And then to analyze and see how it behaves and what it explains and what it doesn't. But definitions also play a much broader role, which have to do with providing narratives around them. And this idea of branding is quite important, and deep tech has quite a high brand value in itself, sure, because we are trying to avoid shallowness. Yeah,
people tend to say it's much more of a consultant world than an economist.
We want to go deeper. So, but at the same time, when we hear about deep tech, we think that we know what we're talking about, but do we really know? And here I have to be grateful to my fellow panelist Asier, because he's the first person I heard the concept deep tech from as we were carrying out a project on Spain, trying to work with the Spanish government and supporting also the European Commission, who funded this work to support knowledge transfer and collaboration within Spain. And I see that this is a study that is extensively quoted in the report. But let me try to go back to your question and give a couple of brief observations about this idea of defining deep tech. And looking at the material, the definition of deep tech is, again, plays a lot with this idea of what it is not, or what we think it is not about, and in contrast to what. So there's the emphasis on aspects around being at the frontier. So we are a bit tired about just playing around with innovations that are at the margin and they are not bringing that substantially new things into. Professor Fiona Murray alluded to the distinction with digital, and many innovations that we see in the digital space are trying to bring little economic value on top of well-established technology. So there is that element there, which I think it's interesting and relevant. There is a few others. She alluded as well to the distinction between atoms and bytes. Exactly. And again, that also reflects this kind of hostility, which I think is important to take into account as well. This hostility against the lack of authenticity, or things that are a bit ethereal that people cannot understand, that are not bedded into the economy and society, that may move to one place or another, that may be taxed anywhere. There's all these aspects, and there is a big social push against these things. So that aspect of the definition tries to capture that. The aspect of linkages, which we cover a lot in this study on knowledge transfer in Spain, which is important. And of course, this is at the point in which I'm getting a bit concerned about that is trying to bring perhaps too much into the definition. So this is the idea of bringing missions as well. Now is a very popular concept. And I think there's always a mission to some extent. Sure. But I think perhaps when we try to put too much into a definition, it ends up being a reflection of what we would like to have more of, but what do we want this definition for? Perhaps it's sometimes better to step a little bit back and then see what's, let's say, definitions that don't try to be so precise, what they represent, whether that explains something that we're interested in, and what are the trade-offs, or helping us understand why is there so much or so little of this deep tech. But I think my final call in this intervention would be to, I probably didn't answer your question, but it's an interesting concept. I think it's trying to get into something that is very relevant and that our society is keen to get to. But I think we need to have a deeper conversation about the meaning of deep tech.
Yeah, sure. So first, technology that stands at the very frontier of the innovation, which are, podemos decir, el límite del conocimiento actual, and also tangible components, which is key, because we are coming out of a period where VC were seeking like SaaS business model, where everything was intangible, and when we go back to deep tech, we go back to the atoms. We leave the world of intangible to the tangible, and that's, I believe it's a good way to nail into the concept. But maybe you as an investor, what is a deep tech company to you? When you have like companies that knock at your door in Tecnalia, how do you discriminate between an underlying technology that is truly deep and a company that you believe is not very, very deep? What is your criteria as an investor? I mean, you have the reflex of an investor.
Well, thank you very much, Fundación Rafael del Pino, for this kind invitation, and it's a real pleasure being here in this panel with so many people that I know. I'm Asier Rufino. I'm actually, we could say I'm an investor. I'm a venture builder, so that's another concept that goes very close to deep tech, and perhaps for the forthcoming research paper fostered by Fundación Rafael del Pino, we could delve into the venture building concept. So basically, my role, I'm the CEO and founder of Tecnalia Ventures, and my role is basically to help take technologies from lab to market. Okay, so I work alongside Tecnalia, which is the largest private research organization in Southern Europe with 1,300 researchers, and we are trying to extract some value by identifying technologies, and I'm going just to cover the 4 different realms of activity within Tecnalia Ventures that I think addresses the question. So the first thing is we try to identify the nuggets inside Tecnalia that are basically technologies that are developed oftentimes or almost always by public money, coming from competitive funding that could emanate from Europe, or it could be coming from non-competitive funding from Basque government, Madrid government, or others. And we try to identify technologies that have the potential to resolve P&L problems for which someone in the industry is going to be willing to pay. And this is very important because deep tech goes almost hand in hand with B2B business models. And therefore, from the onset, we need to be very close to what are the problems that have a dimension, an economic dimension that are worthwhile resolving. And this is the first item. Then afterwards, you need to protect them in the best possible way. There is IP. You need to mitigate their escalation risk. So something that works in the lab may not work on their production context, working 24 hours, 7 days a week. And then regulatory has a very important role because oftentimes in deep tech, you are at the forefront creating new needs, creating new product categories that still need to be regulated. And public sector plays a very important role. Then the second item that oftentimes is played down, particularly in Spain, are teams. We had a discussion just before coming into here. We need to improve the quality of the deal flow. And in deep tech, you need well-rounded teams. You need, ideally, to have researchers that could play, as I often say, the Bosniak type of role in Apple. But you need the Steve Jobs. And the bad news are that the Steve Jobs are usually not in the research organizations, not in the labs of universities. And connecting those two types of stakeholders that oftentimes don't interact in a natural basis is of paramount importance. And it's probably the most complicated task that I have as a venture builder.
So
but
there would be the lack of talent at that point.
Well, I mean, we have disconnected talent. We have entrepreneurial pockets, so people with entrepreneurial capabilities, and then we have excellent science in Spain. But it's very hard to connect the two of them. And oftentimes when we create deep tech companies, we create with teams that were in the lab. And this is fair enough, but you need complementary profiles. And oftentimes we don't realize about it. But once you get the two type of stakeholders in place, money is out there. I mean, I just was explaining that in an A series that we were targeting 5 million euros, we ended up raising 12.5 million euros and turning down 10 million euros. But the money is not going from Spain, which is also a very important factor. In this funding round, so all the capital was coming from the US, was coming from Norway, was coming from France, but just almost no money was coming from Spain. So there is a lot of work to be done at the corporate venture capital VC realm in Spain and the specific specialized funds in deep tech. So, yeah, those are some of the key elements in my work.
Sure, that's one of the gaps that we saw. I mean, the money is coming from abroad. I mean, why? Because in the end, we managed to build over the last, I would say, 10 years in Europe, a deeper and a strong VC industry. And yet, only 25% of domestic share of that VC industry is allocated to deep tech. So maybe a question for Lars. How do you explain this gap in deep tech funding, especially private funding?
I think I actually got a good answer to that one. It's because they don't care about it. It's because there's no money in it. It's way too hard to put to the market. You can't get into a Ferrari fast if you are investing into deep tech. The current model of venture capital, and if you're very precise, it's actually more driven by the limited partners and the expectancy of returns than actually the fund managers. So if you actually want to change something, stop bitching about the venture capital. I would rather go to the limited partners and say, you need to do things differently. You need to set up your limited partnership agreement. It's getting very detailed now, sorry, but you need to do this in a different way. What needs to happen in Europe and what needs to happen in Spain is that we need to diversify completely the way that we look at limited partners. We need to deregulate so that we can get more pension funds interested in this. We need foundations to be interested in this, and we need family offices to be interested in this. Those are the ones that actually have the patient capital. We should not expect anyone else to actually come up with the patient capital. If I was a high net worth individual, would I invest into deep tech? Maybe if I was very, very, very rich. If not, I would probably be investing into something else. But there are institutions that actually have exactly that type of capital. So what we need to do, we need to leverage our own wealth, both in Spain and in Europe. So where is that? And by our own values and our welfare society, and in a way where that welfare society has become money, which is, for example, in our pension funds. If you look in just to the UK, it's a scandal that most of the pension funds that invest into UK healthcare and medical development is American pension funds. That just can't be true any longer. So we need other institutional investors to step up, to take a completely different type of responsibility for Europe and also for Spain. Because if not, we won't have a prosperity. We won't have a welfare society. It will simply, go elsewhere. So one of the easiest ways to say why we need deep tech is that do you want to live a great life? If yes, then start investing into deep tech. If you do not, if you want a bad life, invest no. But I think there is a tendency to optimize for wealth and not for a great life. And the way that we've seen that the world has optimized in venture capital for wealth and not a great life is that we've put an enormous amount of sums into software as a service and purely digital companies. Digital companies, by the way, are great. I don't want to say anything bad about it because we all have an iPhone here or something else, and we all love apps and what they can do for us. And they're all based on a fundamental software as a service methodology, and that's the way they earn money. The problem for a country, and the perspective should be the country here, is that if you invest predominantly into those companies, you create wealth for very few people, and the production apparatus is outside of your own country. One of the other reasons to invest in deep tech is that it re-educates your blue-collar workers. I bet that those countries in Europe that underinvest in deep tech will lose social coherence, will have more poor people and very few rich people. The way that you actually, behind any physicist that creates a new type of solution is a new way to produce. It's a new factory. So behind every physicist stands blue-collar workers that know how to do this. So we need to start appreciating the work of the hand. And we haven't done that, by the way. What we have done in Europe and what we've done in the US is where we thought that we could outsource everything that had to do with production. And now the ones that we gave the production are now dominating us. Last week came out the report from an Australian think tank. You've probably seen it. China is now leading in 2/3 of all the important technologies of the world. Do we want this to happen or not? If not, then we need to start investing into deep tech and into our universities. And it's not just about getting rich, it's actually because we want to continue living a great life. That's it.
So you mentioned maybe the public incentives. You probably saw the National Inflation Reduction Act promoted by Joe Biden that has created a huge incentive to LPs actually to invest in deep technology. Maybe too much in clean techs because it was really tailored for deep tech, for clean techs. But it shows that once you have a state behind that is committed and strongly committed to create the right incentives, you manage to allocate the money. But what are those incentives? We mentioned maybe public subsidies. You have public procurement. You have, which is the most relevant?
Okay, so let's use for example. So what deep tech companies, ventures really want is an annoying customer. A very detailed-oriented customer, also in business to business, that can define how they want the solution and how it should look like. So one of the ways that you can drive this is that you can, for example, you can incentivize government, in this case, the Spanish government. So I'll get back to this, but just a very, very short example of how this was done with SpaceX. SpaceX was developed because they did innovation in procurement. They also have Elon Musk, but anyway. So innovation in procurement. So what they did is that for the COST project, so that was what NASA needed to buy from a very small company at the end, what was called Falcon X, which is now SpaceX. At the time, they wanted them to buy something very specific. They set up very specific milestones. And what they did, and that's the magic of what they did, is that they would only give Falcon, which at the time became SpaceX, the money if they simultaneously developed a civilian market. So that's a way to incentivize how you actually build companies that have a very specific capacity. Like, who wouldn't have the capacity of the US and SpaceX for $6 billion? That's very, very cheap. So I think what needs to happen in Spain, for example, is very concrete and very directed incentives to set up procurement schemes so that the government can stop buying the cheapest stuff, because that's the fundamental thing, and start buying early stage products, prototype solutions from Spanish companies, because right now they're not. So the government needs to step in and actually act as the one that actually incentivize the development of things.
And it's even more relevant that we are talking about technologies where sometimes the market does not exist yet. So
yes, so that makes it very, very hard. So what you need to do when the market doesn't exist is that you, from a country perspective, from my perspective also, is that you need to build on your own positions of strength. So you look into your core sectors. Those can be the ones that actually are the demand signal for those companies to create that market. Otherwise, it won't work. That's the annoying customer. If you go to a very large Spanish company, they are probably on a very, very annoying market, a very well-developed market. So some of those companies can work with them to actually develop their product and get going in that way.
Yeah, sure. So maybe if we try to see some solutions, we started to nail into it a bit. What should be done at the EU level? You mentioned the rise of China. The US now left behind its particular bottom-up strategy to come back into vertical industrial policies. Now it's, what should be done at the EU level? Maybe Óscar, you, the EU guy.
Okay, so first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. It's been really a pleasure to be part of this study. Congratulations, Vicente and Jan and all the team. And it's really a pleasure to share this panel with a lot of friends and people that we have been working for the last years, okay, to promote our innovation ecosystem at the next level, okay. For those who don't know me, I've been the CEO of a technology transfer program. It's called Collider, and taking advantage of Mobile World Congress ecosystem, an international umbrella that happened in Barcelona, Shanghai, and Los Angeles, and was quite useful to promote our innovation ecosystem at the next level. Okay, what we have learned in the last 5 years, as an initial public initiative, okay, that deep tech is not a debate about tech. Okay, it's a debate about economy. It's the excuse of transforming our knowledge into real market value. This is what Lars was saying. Okay, innovation is a question of fitting two different speeds: technology readiness and readiness of the market to adopt it, willingness someone to pay it, as here is someone that has shared with us. And if we want to transform our economy, we should start understanding what's our economy made about, what's component, those traditional sectors, what's our strengths. Okay, and I think it's time to understand in which sectors, on which technologies could Europe or could Spain could be competitive on. I think there's a lot of good noises about investment, big numbers, startups, but I think it's time to focus on those sectors. If we have learned from our capital, it's so that I'm, since last year, more in the investment side in deep tech, the European scale, a lot of opportunities, and I'm assessing a lot of international corporates to launch new business or different international research institutions to transform the way they are working today. Instead of being measured of the height of our publications, why not to be measured on the number of private contracts by industry? I think this is a quite KPI to be measured. We need to change the model. I think Europe has been very good in producing research knowledge, but I think it's time to transform that knowledge into real market industry, new jobs, new corporates. And it's true that investments as a risk business model, okay, builder does not behave as investor. We will see in the future a point of contact to these two worlds. And government should work to create the first initiatives. What we have learned in the last 5 years in Collider is we start behaving as a venture leader, as Asier said, but we understood that we didn't have the industry ready to adopt technology. And innovation should be measured in impacting the P&L, new revenues or new or cost reduction. If it's not measured in impact, this is a different word. This is imagination. This is not innovation. That's what we learned. We should work in 3 different angles. First of all, is visualize the research possibility industry. The sooner the industry was in this conversation with research, the sooner one research will say, this does not make sense for the market. Why not working in that direction? Making proof of concepts and so on. That it's true that in this point of view, governments should create the conditions to behave, for example, as Finland. Finland is the only country in Europe that they invest, do you know, the 10% versus investment in the country a year? 40%, all the investments that are done in the country, 40% are going to deep tech. In Spain, only 15%. So we have a lot of room to improve. If we compared 5 years ago, it's true that it's growing and growing. So first of all, visualizing, setting point of context with industry and research. Second point of view, those research that are ready to be transferred to the market and those sectors that are ready to adopt technology, build together, co-creation, coexistence. And we need to understand, and as Asier was mentioning, it's not the same the person who is interested in making research, but the person who has the skills, right skills to commercialize. And that's those 5 actors of the ecosystem that Fiona was mentioning. It's true. One startup, don't give them money, they waste them. They give smart money customers, okay, and give them the flexibility to work agile and fail fast, as the Americans say very well. No? So visualizing, building, and third, scaling. I do believe that it's true that we have improved a lot in European investment and more in Spain. The first year in 2019, we had nearly 1 billion a year of investment startups. 2020, we had 4.5. 4.5, sorry, was in 2021. 2022, we have 4.3. Only 15% of these investments are R&D. And nearly 50% of startups came from deep tech. I'm not talking about spin-offs. I'm talking AI, I'm talking deep med tech, so we have a good opportunity there. But we need to still work on the early stage phases, creating the conditions to change the mindset, the promote entrepreneurial mindset in the researchers, change the model instead of being measured on how the number of public grants they have raised. What's the impact, real impact they are really getting to the market? The way of measuring it is what's the number of contracts that the industry are contracting every day, finding this auto-sustainable way. And on the other side, we don't have in Europe, I apologize, I don't want to make friends, we don't have in Europe the same market, investment market at the States or as Singapore, but we have good knowledge there. We should work in those sectors we have knowledge that we could be competitive on. If you should ask me, I would say, regarding our economy, it's medtech as evolution of biotech. We have really good hospitals, innovation campus, where we have all the stakeholders of the sector. So I do believe that digital health, Spain could play up really creating global solutions in a global scale, and agrotech as our sector that is very important in our economy. And third, it could be all related to energy transition, okay? But this, we should believe in the early stage, and of course, creating more sense, more conversation in which sectors are more permanent today, more important for us today, and which sectors we should be competitive in the future. No?
Okay, quite clear. And maybe as you finished your stance with Spain, maybe it's the best way to commit people in the room. Maybe some questions from the public at this stage. The first is always the most difficult.
Understood that you were looking for initiatives that are sponsored or budgeted or paid by public entities, public money. But if you look at most of the innovation that comes from states, for example, or a lot of it, not all, it doesn't come from global money. It comes more from initiatives from entrepreneurs, from people, from wealthy people who are not the government. And therefore, is it a problem here to try to get from public people who are maybe not so well prepared to understand this technology, not so well prepared to, let me say, use optimally the money, the answer to our problem?
It's a question for me?
Well, we can complement it, perhaps because I mentioned that they were publicly funded projects. Well, that's the way it starts in Spain, Europe, and in the US. I mean, behind iPhone development, there is plenty of public money. Behind, many things, there is plenty of public money, okay? So you need initially some public money to break barriers of knowledge, to create technological concepts that then you are going to apply eventually to resolve industrial problems. But that's the definition of a term in innovation called valley of death. You have public acting to address a need to develop societal solutions where private wouldn't get involved because of the high risk of this endeavor. And at some point in time is where you need to make a smart use of those resources, smart use of the outcomes funded by this public money, so that you could entice private capital, de-risking both on market and ideally on technology, so that they could catch over. And basically, I just want to emphasize again the important role that venture builders and redefining tech transfer offices in Spain, alongside, in line with the report by the OCD where we got to meet with Fernando, is of paramount importance that the people who are trying to extract value out of those public investments change their mindset or transform into venture builders that are able to identify those technologies, create teams, and just entice private capital just by showing them that the risk of getting their money deployed is lower.
So first risk with Lars, go ahead.
No, I just want to say that, and just building on also on our report, right? I think obviously you just implement all the recommendations and then we'll be good. But anyway, is that, also from this ecosystem perspective and the 5 stakeholders, is that nobody really owns innovation. It's a task where everyone needs to chip in. I think there's just a very specific case for Europe, where we so far has not been able to unleash, I would say, some of the capital that we have, and that you may also have in Spain, to fund some of these fantastic companies. One of the key problems we talk about here, the early stages. If I look at Europe more in general and not specifically Spain, I would probably say that I actually think there is enough seed capital in Europe right now. I think our main problem is the scale-up, what we call growth equity investments, where even the best companies are now becoming Delaware companies, or even are moving even to China, and that's simply a problem, because that means that we have become the accelerator for the rest of the world, and we are not sort of all of the solutions that we in a way paid for, our taxpayers paid for, are we actually not getting, but they're getting into the hands of other people. So I think our policy should be, in a way, less naive around those type of investments. And I do believe that the investments needs to be so significant that it cannot be solved by the taxpayers' money, but we simply need to drive in a different type of private capital to that can actually help us with this very important mission. I sometimes say when I'm in Brussels, and I was actually in Brussels this morning to talk about European competitiveness, and the question was, what should Europe do? And it's hard not to become very pessimistic, by the way, right? Because we seem to be losing, and I think there needs to be not only a fundamental different type of, we need to drive in money, but we also need to do some of the harder parts. And don't get me wrong, driving in new capital can be hard. But there's some fundamental organizational changes that also need to happen in Brussels, maybe even in your own organizations, and those are going to hurt. Like the way that we evaluate research, the way that we evaluate innovation, the way that we simply do things, right? Why do you need to write, I don't know, a 100-page application to get €1 million? It's nuts, right? We simply need to do things differently, right? We can't, my biggest fear is that we get everything right in terms of the money, but we still have a system that really doesn't appreciate the heretical ideas, those ideas that is at the fringe of a paradigm. I bet that if Moderna and CureVac had showed up in Denmark, let's use my own country as an example, Denmark would not have funded them in 2013. They showed up, and NIH and NSF, even in the US, did not want to fund them. But DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, said, we'll fund you because they seem to be a little bit crazy, and if everyone is saying that you have a bad idea, then you probably have a good idea, right? That's also the way it is in life, right? If everyone tells you that you have a great idea, you have a bad idea because your level of you need a higher level of ambition, right? So I think that's a fundamental problem that we need to solve in our society, our ability to appreciate those ideas that are at the outskirts of a paradigm, because otherwise we're funding things that will not at the end of the day make a problem. But that's a different conversation. But we need to stop using peer review and other conservative, stop using peer review in the way that you evaluate innovation. How come we found it? This is all over Europe. We are using peer review, which was invented after the Second World War in the UK, to discipline and driving conservatism within a scientific field has now become the predominant way of evaluating innovation and innovative ideas in Europe. It's crazy how we ended up there. So with all the money of the world, if we don't make all these changes that make the government people uncomfortable, then we won't get there. We need to make some people uncomfortable. Otherwise, we won't get there.
If you permit me last to answer, I do believe that it's depending on the maturity of the ecosystem. In an early stage maturity state, government should create the initial conditions. It's the case of Israel, it's the case of states, but the challenge there is to understand what's the term that you are expecting from the government perspective to get results of the output. I do believe we need to change the paradigm in Europe. We've been very good in creating knowledge, but it's time to find a payback for this knowledge into market value. We need to change the paradigm in the research institutions. And we need to rethink what Europe should be competitive at. Israel have it very clear. They produce technology for the rest of the world. Okay? What will be the model for Europe? I believe that this is the right question. And afterwards, depending on the maturity of the tactic of the industry, there are some technologies that require more time. For example, frontier materials. Frontier materials will be the next revolution in humanity after AI. With a market of nearly 3 trillion, materials everywhere will change the way we're producing. The manufacturing, the health, but I think the society is prepared yet. But one example, we convinced John Hoffman, and this was last year when I was in Global Capital, to move one international convention for frontier materials, and an event is called PASELEX, to Barcelona. But you can imagine, Spain do not invest 8 billion that Manchester invests a year. But we convinced the international community we have a community to create these global conversations. So we need to understand, yes, public money, but in the early stage. Public money with a specific output, not public money to fund large research institutions that anyone does not know what they are working on. I believe it's time to change this model.
And maybe public money through the right channel. Like
of course.
Public procurement would be...
I apologize, Vicente, provoking a little bit. I'm sure I'm not going to invite it anymore.
Maybe, yes? Okay, she was, okay.
Catalina Martinez from the Spanish National Research Council. Very provocative what you just said. I don't agree at all.
Fantastic.
What about Catalin Caricó? She was doing fundamental research for a long time, and she struggled to get funding. But that is not my question. My question is for the venture builders, maybe Asier and you, but for the others too. What is the role of intellectual property to discriminate here between deep tech and digital tech? What is the role of intellectual property here? Asier, for example.
Well, the role for intellectual property to discriminate alongside the definition of deep tech. I mean, IP will go hand in hand with deep tech, but deep tech is also bytes. I'm coming from the hardware side. I mean, we create spin-off companies, as I often say, where tracks come and go because there is tangible stuff, right? Just very quickly on the definition of deep tech. To me, it's a twofold risk, basically technological and market risk, okay? And there you can have hardware, but you can have software, okay? And in Spain, what happens is that, and that's why the first time I spoke with Fernando, I spoke about deep tech. There is plenty of confusion still about technological entrepreneurship, okay? And it's very important that people clearly see the differences between deep tech, biotech, digital, okay, digital sort of copycats, because there are many people called venture builders in Spain, like Núcleo, Carlos Blanco, so on and so forth, and they are venture builders, but basically they spot things that work in the US, in B2C, in digital, or in Asia, and they copy it quite fast in Spain, and they replicate the Cabifys of the world versus the Uber, and this is, you know, a business model that works very well, you know, so, and definitely, as policymakers, you have to foster this type of ecosystems, but what works for that digital realm doesn't work for deep tech. And the problem with deep tech is that you need the IP, but not only the IP. IP is not enough. That's a critical item. That oftentimes when you endeavor to do venture building or tech transfer, researchers believe that with IP everything is sorted out. But it's just the beginning, and sometimes it's not even the beginning. Teams are critical. And again, it makes sense that there is no VC in Europe because there is not that much quality and critical mass of good deal flow. That's the reality. I was talking to Clima the other day, okay, so 250 million euros.
Well, go ahead.
250 million euro VC, you know, in Spain for decarbonization. They were doubting whether they were going to invest on A series, B series, hardware, bytes. I mean, they are investing in B series and bytes because there is not enough, deal flow in Spain for deep tech, hard, A series or seed. You know, so and that's the reality. So and why? Because you need teams, those well-rounded teams. You need venture builders, you know, working on IP, but combining IP with well-rounded teams. So I don't know if that is the question.
Scouting the right opportunities within the universities to circle the framework.
And just to finish off, sometimes you could even license out. The best thing to do, perhaps, is just to license out the IP and get just fresh, well-rounded team. You know, people that were not even in the lab. So
sure. If you permit me add something to that, first of all, if they are good researchers, we need to help them visualize, to give trust to investors. But it's pity to realize that the long tail in research has not transferred properly to the market. Okay, and I do believe we have improved a lot. But we compare investment comparing to R&D a year. I do believe we in Spain we have a lot of room to improve. And there are two sectors that are who are investing more. I do believe next generation funds should help them instead of rescuing an industry. We should use that funds to transform industry in those sectors, which, as economist Vernon said, one country, depending on the knowledge, depending on their costs, attract a specific economy. I believe it's time to think in which economy industry Spain or other countries in Europe could be competitive at. Regarding your question, and complement something in Asier, what we have learned, I do believe that it's sometimes the IP, or more than the IP, how to protect an invention. I do believe it's, as we have promoted researchers to publish, it's something that sometimes it's a risky. And from investment and investors' perspective, as a risk management business, okay, sometimes the first starting point is that it makes sense. It's not the same an idea, the business opportunity, the sustainable business model. You agree on me of these 3 steps, okay? So a good idea, a good business opportunity in a sector and an invention that is everything is published doesn't make sense to invest money, because the early stage of it's something that sometimes you need to make a very big effort. We have Clara Pombo from there that they have a good expertise on that, okay? And afterwards, regarding to the technology transfer, it's not only about the team. Of course, I agree on that. The most challenging a technology transfer program, except one case, the industry that contract and specific R&D regarding their innovation, incremental innovation. For example, this is a coexistence between an industry and research, that this is direct innovation to the market. But the most of technology transfer, this is not only about complementing this merging talent from researchers and commercializing. This program, its main objective and the main challenge is to understand what's the best sectors to start from and what's the best product market fit. And this is perhaps the most challenging technology transfer. And that's not require a lot of money. It requires a specific 15 weeks where industry, where mentors and several experts, of course, and a merged, balanced talent team with research entrepreneurs that are working together. I don't know if it makes sense for you, okay?
So yeah, maybe we will leave the floor to the second table and pursue this very interesting discussion later. We are going to leave the floor to those who actually take the risk, which are much more brave than we do, which are the entrepreneurs, and I think that they deserve to talk and to exchange with the room. Thank you.
Thank you.